Dispensational epochs, fact or fiction? When you talk about there being such a thing as different dispensational epochs in the Bible, some people react very skeptically. They say, well, why is that? Has God changed somehow? Has he changed his mind? Or did God not know that man would fail and then came up with new rules? Has God's plan failed then? Has the way of salvation changed at all? And doesn't the dispensational perspective inevitably lead to conflicts in the Middle East? We'll come back to these objections. But first, I want to show that the Bible actually speaks of it quite clearly, that there are dispensational changes. The first point is actually a point that everyone should have noticed by now. The Bible has two parts, an Old and a New Testament. That in itself means that there are at least two chapters in God's dealings with mankind. What is the difference between these two chapters? You don't have to read far in the New Testament to find the answer. In the very first verse, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The New Testament is since the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And the Old Testament is the time before that. But he is the son of David, the son of Abraham, meaning the fulfillment of what the Old Testament had spoken of. You quickly notice that there are big differences between the Old and New Testaments. In the Old Testament, man is under probation. It ends with curse and judgment. And by the way, it was written in a different language, in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. It offers salvation through Jesus Christ for the whole world, hence in the world language Greek. This point is actually hard to refute, isn't it? The Bible actually has two parts. There are at least two chapters in God's dealings. Now I come to 10 Bible verses which confirm that there are indeed epochs, that there are indeed dispensational changes where God said, up to now I have acted this way, now I act differently. Example 1. God calls Abraham. Genesis 12 verse 1, it says so. And the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. That is, God calls an individual out of his surroundings. He sends him to a foreign land and he blesses him without condition. God had never done that before, but God was perfectly free to do so. Example number 2. There is a progressive revelation. What do we mean by that? One reads in Exodus 6 verse 3 that God emphasizes that he is now revealing himself under a different name. He says, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob I appeared as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. God makes a clean break. He says that up until now, he was known as the Almighty, which he still is, of course. However, at this point, he chooses to use a new name, which is Lord. Example number 3, the New Covenant. In Jeremiah 31:31, God says that he is making a new covenant with the house of Israel. And then he says, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers. Obviously, God is acting differently now. He says, in the past, I made a covenant with your fathers. It looked like this. In the future, I will make a covenant that has a completely different character. Example number 4, John 1 verse 17. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Two very different principles, law and grace, and a clear break in the way God acts. To that Romans 6 verse 14, you are not under law. One should have said that to a Jew. Of course he was under law. So God has changed the rules of the game. Example number 5. The place of worship. Jesus says in John 4, the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. So before it was different. Back then people worshipped in Jerusalem. That was the place that God had chosen. But now a new hour is coming. A different worship is coming in spirit and in truth, and then worship of the Father. This name was not known at all. in this sense in the Old Testament. Example number 6. Peter says that we offer spiritual sacrifices. Chapter 2, verse 5 in the first letter. And sacrifices of praise, as it says in Hebrews 13, verse 15. In the Old Testament, God had prescribed material, literal sacrifices, animal sacrifices. And they were brought, obviously, a stark change. Example 7, the priesthood. In the New Testament, it suddenly says that we, all believers, are a priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices. In the Old Testament, there was a specific class of priests, namely the family of Aaron. Example number 8, God's revelation. I mentioned earlier that it was gradual, but there was a point in time when it reached a conclusion. In Hebrews 1, verse 1, it says, after God spoke in many parts and in many ways, yes, progressively in time past to the fathers in the prophets, he has at the end of these days spoken to us in the Son. That was the complete and final revelation of God. Obviously, a clear dispensational change. Example number 9. Hebrews 10, actually the entire chapter, is a comparison of the old administration and the new administration, namely the sacrifices in the law and the sacrifice of Christ. The sacrifices in the law were a shadow, Christ the image, yes, the thing itself. The Old Testament sacrifices did not make the worshippers perfect, but in the New Testament, the worshippers are made perfect as far as their position is concerned. In the Old Testament, an annual offering. In the New Testament, once and for all. In the Old Testament, the priest stood, but now Christ has sat down. Back then, the sacrifices could never take away sins, but now we read of the abolition of sin through his sacrifice, of forgiveness, and that no more sacrifice is needed once and for all. Example number 10, I'll close with this, although there's much more, but I think it's enough to make the point. Hebrews 10, verse 13. Christ has sat down at the right hand of God, from then on waiting until his enemies are placed as a footstool for his feet. Apparently, obviously, God's plan is not yet finished. Now Christ sits at the right hand of God, but he is still waiting for something that must still happen, namely that his enemies will one day be subjected to him. Obviously, there is another dispensational change in the future, as this verse clearly shows. Conclusion, we have seen that without dispensational epochs, one cannot understand the Bible as a whole. Contradictions would even arise. The Bible very clearly states that such distinct epochs do indeed exist, and that there is in fact dispensational change in the way God deals with humanity. This, of course, naturally raises the question, which epochs are there exactly? We want to explore this question as well, but we'll do that in the next video. Very importantly, the apparent contradictions will then be resolved. And what's so beautiful is that through the dispensation, the glory of God will be seen, how God has glorified himself in each of these eras.